Hi, guys. Welcome back. We're so glad to be back from break. I know you guys are thrilled as well. We are going to be starting our new unit today, Chapter 6, the Israelites. Okay? Now, if you are in your kind of family's faith tradition familiar with the Bible, you might recognize these group of people as the people that are talked about in the Old Testament of the Bible. If you're not, that's okay. These are another ancient Mesopotamian culture that we're going to learn about. And they had some similarities to other cultures, but also some really unique things that made them pretty special. And in fact, the beliefs and early leaders of ancient Israelites represent the foundations of Judaism. And Judaism is one of the world's major religions today. So we can't wait for you guys to learn more about it, and we're going to dive right in. See you soon.
All right, guys, so we have talked about many different religions so far and how people in other places don't always believe the same thing that we believe. However, this unit, you might find that you have more in common with this culture than the other cultures. So we'd like to start with the beliefs and early leaders of the ancient Israelites represent the foundations of Judaism. So we're talking about the foundation of the Jewish religion. And the first thing we want to talk about is the recorded beliefs and history in the Hebrew Bible. The Hebrew Bible is the Old Testament and New Testament together. And we're looking at the Old Testament mostly for the Hebrews because that's where we are in this time period. We will get to what happens in the New Testament in another chapter, but right now we are in the Old Testament. So directly influence other religions such as Christianity and Islam. So this religion is one of the strongest religions in the world. More people worship this one than, I better not say that because I'm not 100% sure, but a large number of people around the world worship only one God, a monotheistic belief. Now that's very different from what we've talked about before. And if you look right here, you'll see mono, and then for my class, there's that word the again, and that means God. So one God. Mono means one. You know, when you look at somebody and they have that one eyeglass, that's called a monocle, and there's only one eyeglass. And so that's a prefix, like poly means many, but mono means one. And this is one of the earliest followers. We're going to call them the Hebrews. They're going to be nomads from Mesopotamia. Remember, they're going to walk around. They're going to find a home, though. They're going to eventually find a home through some other places and some other trials that they have to go through that we're going to talk about later. But this is just the basics of Judaism. So it starts in the Old Testament. We're going to talk about those leaders. We're going to talk about the men that started this and how that influences our world today. All right, guys, we're glad to be back. Good to see you, and I'll see you in class.
All right, guys, one of the first Hebrews that we want to talk about today is Abraham. He is known as the father of the Hebrews, okay? Now, according to the Hebrew Bible, he lived around 1800 BC. Now, take a look at your notes. I know in that speech bubble it says 1200 BC. So what I need you to do is cross it out, and I need you to write in 1800 BC. Now, remember, these people, the Hebrews, were nomads that came from Mesopotamia, and Abraham is actually from the city of Ur. Now, the Hebrew Bible also says that God spoke to him and told him to travel to Canaan, which would belong to the descendants and him forever. So God promised this land to the Hebrews. This land is often called the Promised Land because of God's promise to Abraham and the Hebrews. Now, after Abraham died, his sons and their descendants, or followers, became known as the Israelites. I need you to circle that. It's an important term to know how we got it. Now, Abraham's grandson and Jacob's 12 sons became leaders of the 12 tribes of Israel. Okay? All right, guys, I look forward to seeing you. Bye.
So now we're going to talk about another Hebrew leader that this name might be a little bit more familiar to you. Most of us have heard of Moses in one form or another. And it was, I believe, we briefly mentioned it when we talked about in Egypt as well. So remember that when we left off, the Israelites had been living in Canaan for many years. And this is Jacob, who is a descendant of Abraham. But after many years, they moved to Egypt because of a famine or lack of food. And we know that in the ancient world, if you don't have enough food, then this is like a death sentence. So this is really crucial to have. And a famine, you can think of a famine as the opposite of a surplus. So the Israelites moved to Egypt because there was food there. We know Egypt is very fertile. And they did really well there. They flourished. But after several generations, the Egyptian Pharaoh forced the Israelites into slavery because he was afraid they would rebel and challenge his leadership. They were growing in numbers, they were growing in strength and popularity, so he was looking for a way to control them. That's where the story of Moses comes in. Now, the Hebrew Bible says that Moses was told by God to convince Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. And this is because the Hebrew Bible says that Moses was actually raised in the Pharaoh's household as kind of a surrogate son or a adopted son of the Pharaoh. But he was from the Israelite tribes. The Pharaoh refused to let the Israelite slaves go, though. So the Hebrew Bible says that God sent down 10 plagues. Now, plague is any sort of wide-ranging disaster. It could be, according to the Hebrew Bible, there were plagues like flies and locusts, which are little bugs that eat the plants. There were things like disease. And the very last plague that the Hebrew Bible says that God sent down was the death of all of the firstborn sons of Israel. Or of Egypt, rather, not Israel. The Israelites were protected. And today, the Hebrew holiday of Passover commemorates this event. It celebrates or remembers this event because death passed over the Hebrews. So because of this, the Hebrew Bible says that Pharaoh finally let the Hebrews go. And this departure is known as the Exodus. I want you to put a big star by Exodus. And I can always remember Exodus because the Hebrews are exiting Egypt. And as they went, the Hebrew Bible says that Moses and the Israelites wandered through the desert on their way back to Canaan, the Holy Land or the Promised Land. And the Hebrew Bible says that God made a covenant or a promise with the Hebrews, that he would give them some rules to follow. And you've probably heard of these rules. These are called the 10 Commandments. And the Hebrew Bible says that if the Hebrews were to follow these 10 Commandments, God would bless them. And you see over here, here's an example of some of these 10 Commandments, and you might be familiar with them. Some of them are pretty similar to other laws that we've seen. Things like don't steal or lie. And those deal with how we treat other humans. But the Hebrews also had the first 4 of their laws dealt with how they worshiped God. Things like being monotheistic, believing in only one God or worshiping only one God, and keeping the Sabbath or holy day holy, and not misusing the name of God. Now we're going to look more in depth and kind of think about how these compare to other laws you might know of and other laws that we have studied in the ancient world.
All right, guys, so here we are. Now we're ready to answer a hot question. The hot question, if you don't remember, I want to go over it for just a moment to remind you. You need to have excellent answers that show understanding. You want to explain to me how are the 10 Commandments similar to and different. Guys, look at that. That is at least 2 sentences. And that's got to be a good sentence. So you need to work on giving me clear, accurate information that lets me know that you know how the 10 Commandments are just like other laws or different from other laws in the ancient world. Now, if you're having trouble thinking about the ancient world, you could compare some of those laws to the laws we have. As long as you are comparing and contrasting the 10 Commandments with a different set of laws. Good luck, and we will see you soon.
Okay, now we're on to the land of Canaan. Many groups, such as the Phoenicians and the Philistines, lived in the promised land of Canaan. You can refer back to your level work for more information on the Phoenicians. The Hebrews believed it was God's will for them to live in Canaan, so they fought a series of battles for victory. led by the military leader Joshua. After the Israelites were victorious, they divided the land among the 12 tribes and were ruled by political and military leaders called judges. Most Israelites farmed and herded animals. They worshipped God in a tabernacle that could move from place to place.